This video was sponsored by Bespoke Post. Well, it's video number 3 on the actual construction of this project, and we're still staring at the back of this trailer. If I said things in this Airstream take a long time to build, well, it'd be an understatement. Everything takes so long, but I promise this will be the last video that you have to see me working on this bed. Now, the last time I left off with these storage compartments, and now we're going to work on the white oak tops that will give us access into said storage. And I promise, by the end of this video, the back bed will be done. For the tops, I decided to use Rift Sawn white oak, because, let's be honest, Rift Sawn's the best type of white oak. So I started laying out all my whoopsie-daisy pieces for my tops. I'm going to make these a lot wider than they need to be because I know I have to scribe them to fit that curved side wall of the Airstream, and I want plenty of oak to work with. So after laying out my pieces and making sure I'd have enough per panel, I went over to the joiner and I got a nice straight edge. And then I took all my pieces over to the table saw and I started cutting them down to a uniformed width. This is kind of a long process. Piece by piece, I ran them all through the table saw. One, then another one, then another one, and another one, another board, another board, another board. Speaking of bored, you're probably bored by now. Okay, that's enough running stuff through the table saw. Jeez, Jason, move on. Once I had all my pieces cut to width, I went over to my work tables and I started laying them out. Now I just moved them back and forth, reoriented them until I got a pattern I liked. I mean, they're all Rift Sawn, so they're pretty similar, but some were lighter on one side and darker on the other, so you just gotta play with it a little bit until it looks just right. Once everything was looking nice and peachy, I went and grabbed some clamps and I started setting them underneath all of my pieces. Now, I'm not going to use any dominoes or biscuits or dowels to hook these together because I'm going to have to cut some big holes in the center of them, and I didn't want to have to worry about cutting into those dominoes. So I'm just going to put some glue in between each seam and slap them together, which can be a little tricky as far as alignment goes. So the first thing I do when I glue up things in this manner is I add some clamps over each one of the seams on both ends. And then I take a hammer and I persuade the seams to get into the correct alignment, which means I clamp them up so they're in tension, and then I whack them with a hammer. This kind of makes everything line up. And then you just kind of feel over the top until all your seams are smooth, and you walk away and let them dry. The next morning they were dry, so I came out and I took them out of clamps. Now, because this is less than 20 inches wide, it means I can run it through my planer, which is super nice because it saves me a lot of time cleaning up those seams. So I just stick the entire glued up panel in one end of the planer and I push. In case you didn't realize it, I just told you how a planer works, because I'm assuming at least one of you out there is new to woodworking and you need an explanation. For all you other, veteran woodworkers, sorry, you obviously know how a planer works. You stick a board in one end, and it comes out smooth on the other. Bada bing, bada boom. So with our white oak panels all glued up and now smooth on both sides, it was time to start working on templating them out to fit inside the actual Airstream. Now, you might remember these templates from the last video. I used them lower down when I templated out for the plywood topper on the bed. Now, they don't fit exactly right, but it was a great place to start. The nice thing is that the walls get skinnier the farther up they go, so I can keep using the same templates and just re-scribing them to fit every time. So once I re-scribed the templates to fit the new height of the wall, I went into the shop and just using my bandsaw, I cut along my scribe line until I got it pretty close to perfect. It doesn't have to be exactly perfect yet. This is just going to be a nice jumping off point to get our oak tops to somewhat the correct shape. The only issue is that those initial templates weren't quite long enough, so once again I had to add to them. I started by just cutting my back template at an angle to get it close, then taking it into the Airstream and using my classic pencil and finger method, I scribed along the wall until I got that close as well. Then to hook it to my first template, I just used some CA glue and some activator, and boom, giant template the entire size of our storage compartments. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Now that I had a template roughly the same shape as the back of the Airstream, I set it on top of my oak slabs and I traced it out. Filled in a little bit with the pencil where my tracing wasn't so well. And then it was time to cut to our scribe line. Now before I just pull out the jigsaw and start cutting along that line, I might as well remove as much material as I can with the track saw. This just makes it a lot easier because I don't have these big heavy pieces that start to weigh down as I cut through the line with the jigsaw. So using the track saw like a butcher knife, I started carving away meat. And by meat, I mean excess rift-sawn white oak. Then after I removed all the excess material I could with the track saw, I pulled out the jigsaw and I started cutting to that scribe line. Again, this doesn't have to be perfect. We're going to re-scribe this once we get it roughly to the right shape. So just really quickly, I ran the jigsaw along that entire scribe line, and then I pulled out my router. Yes, my router, with a chamfer bit on it, a big old beefy one. You see, when it comes to scribing, the thinner the material is, the easier it is to get a nice fit against whatever you're scribing to, because there's less material to come in contact with the actual surface of the wall. So I flipped over my entire slab and I added a back bevel using this chamfer bit on the bottom side. This brings the amount of material that comes in contact with the wall to this very thin part right there at the top, which is going to make scribing it so much easier. Once I had this back bevel cut, I carried the entire piece back into the Airstream and I set it in place. I gotta tell you, I was honestly pretty surprised how well it was already fitting, which meant that we were on the right track. Then I just took the pencil and I held it firm against the wall and I drug it along the entire curve, transferring the shape of that curve onto my white oak top, aka scribing a line. Now because we cut a under bevel on this piece and there's such a thin amount of material at the top that we have to remove, instead of pulling out the jigsaw and trying to follow a line, I think it's way easier just to grab a power sander and just sand back until you come right to the edge of your pencil line. Now this is the way that I've scribed things for years, and when I tell people, they seem to look at me like I'm crazy. You use a sander to cut your scribe lines? But I'm telling you, it works so flippin' well. I mean, look at that scribe line. I didn't have to try and wrestle a jigsaw to follow a line the entire course of that curve. I just used my sander, very carefully followed my scribe line, and it fits perfect. Once I had my piece on the left done, it was time to work on my right piece. So I did the same thing. I traced my initial template, I cut off the excess meat with the track saw, and I cut to my scribe line with the jigsaw. Then I flipped the entire thing over, I added that under bevel to thin down the amount of material. I carried the entire thing back into the Airstream so I could get a final scribe line. I set it in place, pushed it firm against my wall. Then I used my pencil to draw a new scribe line that was the exact shape that I needed. And then yes, I used my Festool Rotex sander to cut the entire scribe line. If you think I'm crazy, just try it. I'm telling you, it works. And it not only works, it works really, really well. You can get very tight scribe lines just with a sander. But the trick is the back bevel. You don't want to try and sand a full 3/4 of an inch. You only want to sand like 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch. And boom, scribed. I'd like to say this was the most difficult part of getting these oak tops done. Scribing this entire curve all the way around. But It wasn't. Between you and me, we've got some doozies coming up here in just a little bit. But you'll just have to wait. We're not quite there yet. Now that I had my 2 side panels scribed to the wall, I needed to cut them to the right width. I glued them up intentionally a lot wider than they needed to be, so they were overhanging my storage boxes a lot more than I wanted. So using an adjustable square, I measured the distance they were overhanging on the underneath, and then I transferred that distance to the top and added 1/4 inch. This will give me a perfect 1/4 inch overhang on either side of my boxes. Once I had marked that on both oak tops, I took them off the storage boxes, carried them back into the shop, and I just used the track saw to cut them down to the right width. Zip, zap, zoop. That's the scoop. And because I just didn't think I had enough steps in for the day, I carried them back into the Airstream to once again set them in place and just make sure that all my measurements were correct. And sure enough, 1/4 inch overhang on either side. With that overhang set, I could finally cut the piece for the back of the bed, which would complete the oak top ensemble. So I did this the exact same way I did the side pieces. I cut a piece a lot wider than I needed it to be. I pushed it against that back wall. I got the rough measurement so that I could just cut a pretty harsh angle to get me close to the right shape. I freehanded a little bit of a curve because I knew it was a curve and not a straight line. I took it back into my shop. I cut my guesstimate of a curve on the bandsaw, and then once again I added a back bevel to this piece as well to thin down that material that was going to come in contact with the sidewall of the Airstream. Took it back into the Airstream, set it in place, re-scribed it, went back into the shop, cut my scribe line with a sander, and boom, perfect fit. With all of my pieces cut to fit against those walls, next I had to figure out the access into the storage that they were actually covering up. I'm not gonna lie, I was pretty nervous about this part because I had spent hours scribing these to fit perfectly, and now I had to cut giant holes in them, and if I messed up, I had to redo the entire panels and re-scribe them. Originally, I was gonna use the Shaper Origin, but I just thought that was too risky. So I went over to my friend Chris's shop. He runs Arete Woodworking. He runs some woodworking company that's hard to pronounce the name. Anyways, the point is Chris is an awesome guy. He's super nice, and he's got a giant CNC, which means I could just bring these pieces over to him, plop them down on his CNC, and have the flippin' computer cut out the access holes. And I don't have to worry about it. I did tell him before he started that there was no real pressure, but if he screwed this up, that I was gonna kill him. I mean, I was joking, but Chris stood there and watched the CNC do the entire operation, which was like an hour and 45 minutes. He didn't move once. I think he was pretty nervous. Maybe I shouldn't joke about killing people anymore. Anyways, cutting the access holes was a huge success, much better than I could have done on the Shaper Origin. So with the 4 access holes cut out, 2 on either side, I carried my freshly cut pieces back to my truck, and it was time to go back to the shop and turn these access holes into access doors.
Oh, hey there folks. This video is sponsored by Bespoke Post, and it's a brand new month, which means we got new Bespoke Post boxes to show you. All right, let's see what we got here. This is the Bullseye box. Oh yeah, throwing knives and something to throw 'em at, a target. Who doesn't need to hone their throwing knife skill? This box is called the Slash Box. And they might call it that because you know, I actually am gonna use this because we're going down to the river next week and I have to cut a trail down to the river, and this looks perfect. Oh, it says enjoy. Ooh, the Salud box. This has everything you need inside to make some baller margaritas. Margarita mix, stuff for the rim. I'm actually gonna go make myself a margarita right now. The thing I love about Bespoke Post is that 90% of the products come from small brands, many of which are based right here in the US, which is really cool because you're supporting small businesses. Each box of awesome has around $70 in value, but you only pay a fraction of that price. And you only pay for what you want. You'll get a box assigned to you each month based on the quiz you take when signing up. The quiz is really cool. They ask you a bunch of questions on the website, and it kind of tailors the boxes exactly for you. Before the box is shipped to you, you get a preview to decide if you even like the box. So you can 1, keep it, 2, swap it for a different box, or 3, you can just skip that month entirely for absolutely no charge. Huge thanks to the people over at Bespoke Post for sponsoring this video. And the cool thing is, if you head to bespokepost.com/woodworking20, use the coupon code woodworking20, you'll grab your box of awesome stuff and you'll get 20% off your first box. So there's a link right there and down in the video description.
Once we got back to the shop, I carried my freshly cut out oak tops back into the Airstream to set them in place again. Because that's what I do now. I set things in place and then I take them back out. And then I set things in place and then, oh look, I took them back out. Now it was time to figure out how to make these access panels into concealed doors. And when I say concealed doors, I mean I don't want to use some cheap piano hinges that are going to sound like a dying witch in a year. I wanted some hinges that you didn't even know were there. So immediately I thought I might as well just use Euro-style cabinet hinges. I mean, this is basically a cabinet door. It's just laying down instead of upright. So why wouldn't they work? So I marked and measured just the same way I would for any cabinet door on any cabinet carcass I've ever built. Once I had all the hinges marked out, I went over to my drill press and I drilled them out. Still not quite sure if this was going to work the way I thought it was in my head. But heck, I've only spent about 2 days working on these panels. I might as well drill some holes in them just to see if it'll work. That seems smart. Next, I grabbed these Blum face frame hinges. Now these are hinges specifically designed to hook on the inside of a face frame, which means they should work in this orientation. Then I started grabbing playing cards and using them to space out the reveal on all 4 sides, just like I would on a cabinet if I was installing doors. The only problem is I ran out of normal playing cards, so I had to break into my Seinfeld trivia board game and steal some of those cards. But hey, cards are cards. And pretty soon I had all of my hinges pre-drilled and installed, and things were looking pretty good. I removed my playing card / Seinfeld trivia card spacers, and I think this is possibly gonna work. So, as we've learned in previous videos, what you do to one side, you have to do to the other. So I installed the hinges on the other access door the exact same way. Now the only issue with these hinges is because these doors would technically be classified as inset doors, there was nothing to keep them from closing too much. So I needed to add a little catch on the inside of the oak panel that the doors could land on, so that they would stay flush with the top of the panel. So I just cut these little white oak squares, then using some wood glue and CA glue, I just glued them on the bottom side. This makes a nice little lip that the door can land on, and everything can stay looking fresh and clean, like Jimmy Dean. Actually, Jimmy Dean is not fresh and clean. My son eats those sausages and his hands are all greasy and he gets grease fingerprints all over the counter, and he always wants to touch the windows and it gets all gross. And anyway, sorry, I'm getting off topic. Once I had the cabinet doors installed, I carried the panels back into the Airstream because we haven't done that enough already in this video, and I just made sure that they fit the way they were supposed to. Then back into the shop because I wanted to add a nice little 16th inch roundover to all the doors and the insides of the openings, mainly just because I'm a roundover freak, and given the opportunity to roundover, Jason's gonna roundover. And then all the doors were installed. And working pretty darn good. I love that you can see the reveal all the way around, but you can't see the hinges. It reminds me a lot of a boat. Once I was sure that the doors and hinges were going to work properly, now we had to figure out a way to actually open them up. I really didn't want to use some hardware in the top because I wanted the entire oak tops to be flush, so that if you wanted to set stuff up there, you could, and hardware wouldn't get in the way. So I figured just a simple hole drilled in each panel would be the simplest solution. So after drilling out my holes in the drill press, I used that 1/16 inch roundover on the inside of each hole to make it nice and smooth. And ooh la la, these access doors are looking pretty schwanky. I just couldn't help myself. I mean, I had to carry them back into the Airstream again just to see if they fit. Well, that's a lie. I already knew that they fit. I just wanted to see what they looked like now that I had the doors installed and the holes and everything. And I mean, I brought one in, so I might as well bring the other one in, just to stand and stare at it for a while. I mean, these took me a long time. Get off my back. Don't pretend like you wouldn't do the exact same thing in my situation. Now, the one cut I had yet to make on these oak panels was how long they needed to be, because they're going to run into a wall, and although I knew where the wall was going to be, I just hadn't worked up the courage to cut them to length yet. So now that they were in here, I figured I might as well mark them and cut them. So I grabbed my laser level to put a laser on the line that I already knew was going to be the wall. That line transferred onto the oak tops, and then I used a ruler to draw a pencil line on the end of the top that I could cut with the track saw. Speaking of which, I carried the pieces back into my shop and I cut them to length with the track saw. No going back now. Now that all the pieces were cut to the exact size my doors were installed, it was time to sand. And when I say it's time to sand, I mean it was time for me to tell Craig that he needed to sand all these pieces, while I did other things. Which in this case, were figuring out a way that I was actually going to attach these oak tops to the plywood boxes. Now, I said in the last video that when I was designing this back portion, I'm trying to do it in a way that it could be modular, meaning that I could pull all these pieces out should I need access to any of the water lines or electrical for maintenance. So I wanted to attach these tops to the plywood in a way that I could remove them should I need to. So instead of overthinking the entire process, I just added a bunch of these metal brackets, and I'll use those to install the top. While I was busy fiddling with metal brackets, Craig had completed his sanding tasks and had moved on to finishing all of our oak pieces. Of course, we're finishing them with Rubio Monocoat's Cotton White. Because, I mean, come on. Did you really expect anything else? Now, we finished the surrounds of the oak tops earlier in the day. Then we ran out of Rubio and we finished the lids later on that evening. I'm just telling you right now, that's going to come back to bite us, but you'll just have to wait till the end of this video to find out why. After we got the entire tops nice and finished, that's when I remembered I wanted to install these outlets on either side of the bed. Now, why? Why did I not think of this until now? I mean, I had somebody cut out these giant holes with a CNC. I could have just had them cut out holes for the outlets too, but I didn't think about it. And now these pieces are sanded, they have finish on them, I don't want to mess them up, and I have to cut holes in them? I decided I was going to use the Shaper Origin for this, and specifically the Shaper Origin Shaper Plate, which allows you to cut small things fairly easily. The only problem is I didn't know how to use it. So I called my buddy Sean at Shaper, and he gave me a little tutorial. I'm not going to go through the entire process with you, but basically you can design something on the Shaper Plate, and then instead of having to redesign it every time you move the Shaper Origin around, you can just move the plate around and cut out the exact same shape. I mean, it does a lot more than that, but That's kind of the general gist. So I marked on my 2 white oak pieces where I wanted my outlet holes to go, and then I used the shaper plate to reference where I marked on the top with this little slidey doodad there. And you don't even have to clamp down this plate because it's got rubber sticky stuff on the bottom so it doesn't move around while you're cutting. Then I grabbed the shaper origin, I designed the right size rectangle right on the machine, and I just followed the line like a weird space age router cutting video game. And what do you know? It worked pretty darn good. Now, I was cutting through 3/4 inch white oak, which meant I had to go slow and make multiple passes. Now, I probably could have done 1/4 inch at a time, but I'm a wuss, so I did 1/8 inch at a time, which means yes, if you do the math, 3/4, 1/8 inch, I had to make 6 passes just to cut a little rectangle. But I didn't mess it up, and it looked real nice and clean. And what you do on one side, you have to do to the other. So, pretty soon, I managed to successfully cut out 2 rectangles for my outlets to slide into without screwing up my finish. Moment of truth. Will the outlets actually fit? I don't know. Wait for it. Success. And they look pretty good. These are going to be perfect placement on either side of the bed, so while you're laying in bed at night and you want to charge up your cell phone, you can plug it in. You want to make some toast, you plug in a toaster. You want to blow dry your hair while you're laying in bed? Well, you shouldn't do that because you're going to get the pillows all wet, so you should get up off your lazy butt and go in the bathroom and blow dry your hair. I'm talking to you, Kara, aka my wife. And I can say things like that because she doesn't even watch my videos. After my outlets were successfully installed, I just had to reinstall my cabinet doors. And then I flipped them over, and what the hell? Why are these doors a different color? I didn't even realize at first. You can see on my face right now, my expression starts to change as I realize they don't even match. Dun dun dun.
Well, this just goes to show you that not everything you see on YouTube goes perfect and as planned. As you can see, these are a completely different color than the rest of the top. The only thing I can think, well, the only thing it could be is that we finished the outside, we stopped, we went and had some dinner, came back, finished the tops, and we were almost out of the can that we used for the top here. So we switched to a brand new can and we did the doors. And I would assume that Rubio, like anything else in the world, has different lot numbers when it comes to color. You go get tile at the store and it says the lot number on there and they say, make sure you use the same lot number or else you're gonna lay the tile and it's gonna be 2 different colors. Well, I think that's exactly what has happened here. In this case, it's pretty extreme because this is very yellow and this is that nice cotton white that I know and love. So the only thing to do is to re-sand down the tops, refinish it so we get a nice consistent color. The unfortunate part is I don't have time to do that and get them installed and finish this video because it's 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon and the video comes out tomorrow morning at 5 a.m. So in an effort to get you your video on time, this is where I'm gonna leave you. Sometimes things just happen and I'm here to show you the good and the bad. So I'm gonna get to work sanding these down, putting a finish on them, and you'll have to see them installed on our next episode of the Airstream build. Next week, we're not doing an Airstream episode. We're gonna take a little break, and I'm gonna do another tips and tricks video, because it's been a while since I've done one of those. So for now, I say goodbye. Make sure you check the video description down there for links to products and everything we used. Also, there's a link to our second channel, Bourbon Bites. If you're not subscribed over there, go check it out. All the same content in bite-sized form. And because it's bite-sized, it's a lot harder to see those mistakes that do happen. They always happen.